program is rated GE. Content carried in here is suitable for general family viewing.
Good evening. It is the last day of April 2024. We are glad you're watching Law Matters on a day that Kenyans have continued to face the devastating effects of the wrath of Mother Nature, with death and loss of property witnessed across the country. Many stakeholders have said that the government is to blame for this particular situation, given that an alert was given on this anticipated disaster. But who is to blame in this particular situation? That's why on Law Matters assured that is educative, informative, and offers legal aid solution on what we face on our day-to-day lives, is focusing on that particular topic, looking into who is responsible and what should the common mwananchi be doing in such situations. My name is Irene Mwangi, but before we get into the nitty-gritties of this particular discussion, let me allow my guest to introduce himself.
Thank you, Irene, for the opportunity. I believe that there is no better opportunity, better time to be able to talk about this very pertinent topic in the society. So I go by the name Nganga Peter Kariuki. I'm a lawyer, currently based at Oraro and Company Advocates. I currently have a bias towards dispute resolution and alternative dispute resolution mechanisms which cut across arbitration, mediation, and I'm also an environment enthusiast. So I believe that as we delve into today's topic, it will be informative and it will create awareness to the larger population as we converse or as we go through this current calamity, as we put it. Yes, and thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Lawyer Kariuki, of course, for making time, and what a timely discussion, of course, focusing on issues that are quite pertinent to you. But before we get into the legal discourse of this particular discussion, there has been words that different words that the government and non-governmental organization have termed as either a calamity or a disaster. So how can we term those two? How can we define those two so that we can get into the legal context of this discussion?
Okay, thank you for the question. I believe those two words have been used interchangeably in different contexts. However, I don't believe there is currently a defined term of disaster, in that this and this is what is categorized as disaster, and this is what is categorized as calamity.
Yeah.
However, it is important to note that disaster has been used in the National Disaster Management Policy to mean anything which has ravaging effects on the environment, on human beings, and on the property. So on human beings, it's things which cut across health hazards, things which would lead to loss of lives. On property, these are things which will lead to material damage of property, and these are also things which may lead to loss of property. There are various ways in which disaster can come about. This is, for example, through the natural ways, such as earthquakes, such as floods. But as we delve deeper, we'll get to see that some of these disasters, even if they are natural, they have been caused by some of the activities we've been involved in as human beings. We have floods, we have drought, and I would also want to include things like the economic crisis that we currently have, things like the novel coronavirus, something which we had not had before. So defining it goes into the context of the type of issue which you need to address, noting that we currently don't have very comprehensive legislation that pertains to disaster management, except from the policy that is in place. And on calamity, I believe this is an aggravated disaster, one which has more ravaging effects, and one which has ended up probably leading to the loss of lives or the loss of property, and which the government is always called to action to try and bring things to a calm. So that's the definition which I will bring about when I'm asked about the question about disaster and calamity.
All right. So what you're facing currently in the country, the floods and the impounding rain that has cost deaths more than 170 and counting, it appears to cut across both a calamity and a disaster, depending on how you want to look at it. And every time we'll hear the citizens say, Serikali's idea. What are the rights surrounding the occurrence of a disaster or a calamity that a citizen can defend themselves in front of the government to say, this is my right and it is not being protected in this particular situation?
Thank you, and that's a very good question. I believe that by virtue of our Constitution 2010, it empowered the citizenry to have that opportunity to approach court in case they feel their rights have been infringed or aggrieved. Unlike in the old Constitution, where there was a lot of conundrum with regards to how you approach the court. So with the current regime, Article 22 has provided that locus standi. And when you look at our Bill of Rights, it's among the most comprehensive, noting that it even comes from the Magna Carta, which envisioned even rights that are not provided for, as long as you can prove before a court of law that there is infringement of the right. So among the rights which are very pertinent or which are gravely affected when we have a disaster or a calamity, mostly it's on Article 43 of the Constitution, which is on the social economic rights. So on the social economic rights, most of the time you find that when a calamity occurs, people are displaced from the places where they live in. You find that most of the times there's contamination of water, especially when there's floods, something like floods in the current situation in which we are involved in. You find that areas where there are floods, this dirty water gets to mix with the sewage, and that leads to health hazards. So again, that leads to the infringement of highest attainable standards of health, which is what is provided for under Article 43 of the Constitution. The other question will be also on adequate housing. Your house has been washed away by the floods. Where are you going to move into? Yes, you'll be taken to some temporary place which the government has put to serve at the moment, but what next? So there are a number of rights which are broken when we have a calamity. There's also the question about human dignity. You have children who don't have clothing. You have children who don't have the right to access school because their schools have been washed away. You have people, their freedom of movement is curtailed because they can't move from one side to the other because, let's say, the bridge has collapsed or the road has been cut, or even in the recent, I think it is in the dailies that there is a bridge. No, there is a railway line which is hanging on your way to Naivasha, and that again has hindered movement and transportation of goods from one point to another. So that will lead to losses because that is a businessman who's transferring their goods to somewhere else, and now they have been put on hold until that is sorted. So there are a lot of rights which are infringed, and in the Constitution, when you look at Article 19, these rights are inherent and are not granted by the state, nor can they be taken away by the state when there is a calamity. These are rights which need to be enforced and need to be taken into account all through.
Is there a specific threshold that can warrant a citizen to move and seek or sue the government in case they feel in a situation of calamity or disaster, their rights have not been catered for? The reason why I'm asking this is because even in the event of floods and drought and even a pandemic, there are issues that, there are situations that reoccur, and it is the same situation each and every time. What we are facing right now is not something we did not face last year, only that the magnitude this time is a bit more or higher. Is there a specific threshold that somebody can hold on to say, this right and this right has been violated, and therefore I have a legal ground to even sue the government?
Yes, thank you, Irene, for that question. Our constitution, as I said, is a very progressive constitution. So when you look at Article 20, Clause 5, it talks of that the state is supposed to allocate resources for the widest possible enjoyment of rights by the citizenry in regards to the prevailing circumstances. So a keen read of that text then shows that the government is obligated, when a calamity arises, to assign funds to come and solve temporarily the crisis that is in place, and also in the long run compensate the parties that have been affected by that calamity. And this is even provided for in the National Disaster Management Policy, and even acts such as the Victim Protection Act. So when you look at it, it's that the state is obligated, and that's why we have, even under Article 208 of the Constitution, the contingency fund. So this is a fund which the government should be able to bring on the table and distribute to those genuine cases. And this has in the recent past not been implemented fully, but looking into the future, this is an area which the government should look into by having one piece of legislation, which is the Disaster Management Act, that will come in place to come and solve all these predicaments and all these problems. Because when you look back, as we stand today, more than 10 years since we had the last post-election violence, we still have people who are in in camps. And you see, these are people who should have been compensated way back. This has dragged them financially, this has dragged them socially, and this has also dragged them from where they would have wanted to be. So this is a crisis which the government should look into and devise a way in which it can streamline these funds, so that we don't rely on the contingency fund, but we rely on an assigned fund which can come into play when we have the different ravaging disasters which cut across floods, earthquakes, droughts, even the economic crisis. So these are things which the government really needs to look into and work to devise a way in which they can solve this problem once and for all.
Thank you, Kariuki, for putting a perspective concerning the issue of funds, and we'll be getting deeper into that when you're talking about compensation. But before we delve down on that, can the government impose restrictions on the common wananchi in case of the disasters? The reason why I'm asking this is because recently, I think the day before yesterday actually, the Interior Cabinet Secretary Kithure Kindiki said that people will be arrested in the situation whereby they move around when we are having moving waters. Of course, it is a safety concern, but then there's an issue of it is my life. Then how can the government impose a restriction when in the first place they failed to protect me to the extent that this is happening? Can the government impose restrictions to the locals?
Yes, thank you for that question, Irene. So when you look at the law, I will break my argument. I'll break my discussion points into three limbs. So on the first limb, I will say that yes, the government can limit the rights of the citizenry when they look at the situation and see that indeed there needs to be put measures which will avert any crisis or the loss of lives. And this is provided for under Article 24 of the Constitution. So the Article 24 of the Constitution, however, has its own set of rules which must be adhered to. There is the question about what is the nature of the right. For example, if it's freedom of movement, the government cannot limit you from accessing your place of work. What they need to do, they need to show you an alternative way. Secondly, there's also the proportionality. So if you limit me from going to work, are you able to provide food for my family during the time when I have that crisis? So that, again, is something which the Cabinet Secretary should have factored in when he spoke about arresting people for attempted suicide. Because attempted suicide, when you look at the laws which the National Council for Administrative Justice wants to amend, it is the Criminal Procedure Code, because it's considered to be very archaic and very colonial. So you can't proceed to charge someone for attempted suicide, someone who's going to fend for his family in town. So what you need to do as a government is tell this person that this time which you are supposed to go to fend for your children, you will stay at home, we will provide meals for your family until you're able to cross the bridge in this or avert this crisis that has currently befallen us. The other one is on the Public Order Act. So the order that he gave, I tend to believe that he relied on the Public Order Act, and I would even propose in the future press briefings that the government should be very clear on the laws which they are relying on, because some of these decisions which they make, yes, they believe these decisions are based on the law, but they are really not based on the law. Because yes, the Cabinet Secretary under the Public Order Act is mandated to issue a crisis meeting or a press briefing in the instance in which they want to limit some rights when there is a crisis in the country. But the procedure is that once they have issued the same, they should liaise with the national government, the legislature in this case. And the legislature is the one who are supposed to then issue this emergency, in liaison with the president. So all these procedures have not been followed, because we see a case where even the president himself has not pronounced himself on this issue of the floods, except from, I think, a statement which was issued today. But he has not declared it as a disaster yet. So what then warrants the Cabinet Secretary to refer to it as an emergency? This takes us back to Article 24. Has he adhered to the tenets which are set for the limitation of this right of freedom of movement? No, he has not adhered to those rights. And I think that is something which is very pertinent and needs to be addressed moving forward. When you declare a crisis, what then have you provided as the alternative measures for the citizenry as they await that crisis to pass? Those are very heavy questions which the government needs to answer, especially at this pertinent time when you are facing the ravaging floods.
Okay, before we take our first break then, given that an alternative option has not been given, can the public defy in the event that they feel that an alternative has not been offered? And if I'm arrested by the police officers, I can lay a case that, okay, this directive was given, but I was not issued an alternative, therefore I defied it. Can somebody win such a case, given that no recourse was given for certain orders?
Thank you, Erin, for that question. So, as I said, the citizenry currently, as we have it under the Constitution, are very empowered. And under Article 22 of the Constitution, one may be taken to court through a criminal offense, but they can still proceed to the High Court and even the magistracy level, the subordinate courts, and plead the infringement or violation of their rights by asking the court through a petition why the government has proceeded to infringe on their rights. If I may take you back, I want to refer you to when we had the coronavirus, in which we had the former president of the Law Society of Kenya, Nelson Harvey, when he proceeded to court and sued the Kenya police through the Inspector General when they had used more power than is necessary to limit the freedom of movement of people and enforcement of the curfew hours. The court proceeded to issue an order urging the parties who were aggrieved to lodge the same with the Independent Police Oversight, which is the body that is in charge of oversighting the police, because that went over and above their call of duty. And secondly, the court also issued an order stating that those enforcement orders were illegal and unconstitutional. Coming back to the question which you have asked me, then that begs the question, can the government then force you to follow an illegality? The answer is no. And when the government takes you to court, the Office of the Director of Public Prosecution, being an independent office under Article 157 of the Constitution, they need to look at the weight as well as the nature of the offense which has been taken before a court of law charging this citizen. And the point at which that case should collapse, should be at the point of the Director of Public Prosecution. But in the instance that it proceeds to a court of law, then an aggrieved party can move the court through a petition challenging the illegality of that order, which has been posed by the government.
All right, thank you so much, Lawyer Kariuki, for that particular perspective. But first, we'll have to take a break. The discussion is gaining a momentum, but we'll be back with more. Stay with us.
Kaunti maarufu kwa kuzalisha maziwa na ukuzaji wa majani chai. Pia, serikali ya kaunti inawahimiza wakulima kukumbatia mitindo mingine ya kilimo kuzidisha mapato.
Kama kuna kikundi moja inafanya biashara ya kuuza kuku, hao pia tumewafadhili kuwafunza jinsi ya kuhandle zile kuku kwa sababu wanaleta kwa wingi.
Haya yote tunakuletea katika Boresha Kilimo, toleo la kaunti ya Bomet.
Kilimo ni nguzo kubwa kwa ujenzi wa taifa.
Are you an aspiring media practitioner, a graduate, or you just want to advance your skills in television production? Then welcome to Kenyatta Station in Kenya is now offering short courses in TV studio, field technical operations, and video editing. Through these courses, you will acquire hands-on skills on camera operations, media production, lighting techniques, audio-visual editing, and sound and visual control, and how to operate key equipment in modern TV control room. Enroll today at KUTV and discover your full potential in cutting-edge TV broadcasting. Graduates of these courses will receive professional certificates. For more information, visit our offices at KUTV Studios or call us on 020-870-4252 or 020-870-4255 or SMS us on 0739-110-544. KUTV, a new experience.
Tunachimba hadi mizizi kukuletea yanayojiri.
So mimi naomba tu serikali yetu ya Mungu, jibarikiwe na Mungu, iweze kuteremsha bei ya mafuta.
Yanayokukumba tuna maizi, tunakutetea sisiri. Kwa kweli ni speciali tukikupambia makala ya mwanamke mwake. Utasema hupendi mizizi ya habari. Nami Caroline Kiwe.
Tonight, we are looking to the issue of the rights of Kenyans during calamities and disaster. What should the government do? What should the common mwananchi do in such scenarios? And of course, looking into what is happening in the country. Who's to blame for the deaths and the loss of property that has occurred in the past few weeks? Now, Lawyer Kariuki, we left it off at some of the orders that have been put in place by the government, the restrictions and what have you. But it begs the question, given that you've said that the Interior Cabinet Secretary touched on different acts to put in the restriction, which begs the question, are there any laws or regulations that govern the citizens when it comes to disasters and calamities here in the country?
Yes, thank you for that question. So what I'd say is that when you look at the Constitution, there is no time when we have a bias towards the obligation to respect some laws and a bias not to respect others. The Constitution is to be implemented comprehensively at all times. Mm-hmm. So when we talk about the question of the current laws which are in place, to guide the question about disaster management, they are fragmented all over. And when you come to think of it, I don't know if you know, we have the National Drought Management Authority.
NDMA.
Yes. So the National Drought Management Authority, we recently had a drought, and as the citizenry, we never felt the impact of this National Drought Management Authority. We have the ASALS Authority, the Arid and Semi-Arid Lands Authority. We currently had the drought. We did not feel their impact. We even have ravaging floods in the northeastern part of Kenya, but we currently don't feel the impact. The only people who we are looking up to help or save us during this time is the Red Cross and then the humanitarian bodies. So that begs the question, are we as a country prepared to, in terms of crisis? The answer is no. We currently have a national dispute management policy, but a policy is just a policy. Yeah, its work is to guide the implementation or the drafting of the necessary laws. So how the same has not been turned into a bill and eventually into a law is a question which the government needs to answer us at this very pertinent time. Because if we had a National Disaster Management Act, it will guide us how we will prepare for a disaster or a calamity, how we will respond to a disaster or calamity, and the aftermath of a disaster or calamity, what will we do? Recently, and I think it was yesterday, we had a dam that burst its banks in Maimahio, in Naivasha, in Nakuru County. What we've had, what we have witnessed, is different people representing the government coming forth to issue statements, but are not giving us a framework, telling us that this and this is what we are supposed to do. They're just telling us we are planning to move these people to safer grounds, but they're not telling us we're planning to compensate these people, or we have mandated this authority or this parastatal of government to come and assess even the damages, or even to assess the loss of property and the loss of lives, and spearhead the process of even compensating these people. So these are the dire needs which the government needs to address by having a framework that addresses all this into one. We recently had the coronavirus, and we saw how the government grappled with addressing the coronavirus. What even helped us more was the outside help, which is the through the international bodies such as the World Health Organization and even the United Nations, and the donations we had of the vaccines. So that goes to beg the question, are we as a country prepared? Yeah, and a good example would be fire management. And it's important also to note that these functions of disaster management are both at the national level and the county level. Because when you look at Article 186 of the Constitution, as well as the 4th schedule of the Constitution, disaster management, fire management, flash floods, these are things which have been devolved also to the county governments. So the question again is, are also our county governments prepared to face these disasters? Or do they, when disaster comes, are they then tasked to seek assistance or guidance from the national government? So there's this loophole which needs to be addressed through having a law that addresses our preparation, our response, as well as our aftermath when we have a disaster. Because as we currently stand, we don't have an act, we just have a national disaster management policy, and some of the acts which try to mitigate the disasters are, for example, the Physical and Land Use Planning Act, which then mandates the county governments before issuing approvals for the buildings. They then have to look at things, is this property built on riparian land? Because if it's built on riparian land, then that means when they comes to heavy rains, there will be flash floods in that specific area. Or this building being built past, let's say, 10 floors. There are areas which are designated that buildings will only move to 10 floors. The reason is there are experts who looked at even the quality and of the soil in which these buildings are being built. But due to impunity, we have some areas which they are designated to be 10 floors, but they move to be 14 floors. So again, the question is, are the necessary bodies, oversight bodies that are mandated to look into these constructions, are they doing their rightful jobs? Because there are areas which they are not supposed to be constructed, these buildings, but these buildings end up being constructed. There are areas where these dams need not to be constructed because of the dense population of the people, but they proceed again to have these dams being built in areas where we have large populations. The question is, again, are these people acting according to the mandate which is bestowed upon their bodies? The other act, as I said, is the act which governs the National Drought Management Authority. My proposal will be the National Drought Management Authority should be converted and restructured to be referred to as the National Disaster Management Authority, so that it's able to cover a wide range of disasters, not just drought. We have floods, we have earthquakes, we have even things like the coronavirus, health hazards, we have things like the climate change. These are things which should be covered by this body, which has already been put in place by having an amendment for the restructuring of the National Drought Management Authority. Okay. The others is, I think the previous government had the National Disaster Management Unit, but again, that was just created through a directive by the president. We want that to be put in law so that funds are assigned to that authority, and it becomes an independent body that then gets to deal with issues to do with disaster without having to wait for things like the cabinet approval or the president's direction. These are people who have to be hands-on always, that when a disaster comes up, they're able to swing into action and they're able to cover the damages and the crises before even the national government assigns funds through the contingency fund.
All right.
Yes.
Now, when you look into the Maimahiu incident, which you have touched on, it sort of can be mirrored to be the Solai Dam incident, whereby a whole village was swept away due to that particular disaster. In this particular case, it was termed to be the old Kijabe Dam that burst its banks, although the government is saying it is River Tongi that burst its banks. But now the big question is, who is to compensate the whole village that was swept away? In Solai Dam, it was a different issue because the dam was a private entity. But in this particular case, it is not owned by any particular individual. If anything, it appears to be a government property. And when it comes to the government now, it's a dicey issue because compensation, when you're talking about the government, it's a long procedure and the bureaucracy that's around that. So who is supposed to compensate these particular individuals? What are the measures that should take place? Because most of the time we see tokenism in terms of the government saying we'll pay your hospital bill and that will be the end of it. What about the life that they had behind? People who have lost their parents, their children. What will be the compensation mechanism in that place, or who should be to blame?
Okay. Thank you, Erin, for that question. We come from a background where we believe as a country, again, when I come back to a progressive constitution, that the government is not immune to civil or criminal proceedings. Yeah. What this means is that even on the criminal aspect, there is the doctrine of horizontality, which states that the government officials who were in charge of that specific area to make sure that all these hazards, for example, there's the National Environment Management Authority. There are these officials who are supposed to be doing these rounds around the area, especially during a time when we have these floods, to be able to inform the citizenry through an environmental impact assessment that this dam is going to break its banks. Yeah. And all the stories we hear every other time we talk about the bursting of these dams is that there was a certain sound which people were hearing, which sounded like the dam is about there's about to be flash floods. Yeah. So the people who are mandated to inform the citizenry, it means they lag behind in their job. Yes, this is a natural disaster, no one planned it, but again, as I said, there are people who are mandated according to their job roles, to make sure that they prepare the citizenry and they inform them promptly. Yeah, a joke was even made that, for example, the children were told they will not be reporting back to school at midnight when some had already left home. So when you mirror it to the current situation, the government or the officials should have informed these people prior when they noticed that this place has busted banks. I've seen the president's directive with regards to the current floods, and he's advising people to move from Kiambere and Masinga Dam, which have reached their historic high. What the government should do is not ask them or request them. They should proceed and evacuate them before we have any crisis. So the government should play a very proactive role that when we look at even the tripartite typology of obligations, the government is mandated to promote and fulfill the enforcement of the freedom of rights and the human rights. What this means is that the government is mandated to proceed always with caution where they feel, because I'm sure with the government, they have the meteorological department, which had probably advised them that at this time, they are supposed, this and this is due to happen. And they saw that this dam had filled its normal to its capacity, and they should have moved swiftly and evacuated these people. And even come to think of it, why would a dam face a very densely populated area? So these are some of the grappling problems which we have as a country. And I believe moving forward, the president should map out and put in place a task force that will look into all the dams we have in the country, whether private or public. And when these people look out at these dams, they mark out which dams need to be demolished, because you can't have a dam at the behest of a densely populated area, because that is a disaster in waiting. And so the government moving forward should look for a way in which they can work around the same. And as I said, the doctrine of horizontality on those officials who slept on their job should be put into action, just like we had in Solai Dam, where I think the CEC was sued. I wouldn't want to talk into the matter because the matter is still in court. They are still active in court. But the same should also be employed into this Mai Mahiu matter. All those officials who are mandated to make sure that they inform the due public and they evacuate the public in good time, and they also do surveillance of these hazardous places, should be put to action and explain why they did not do their rightful roles when they were needed to do that.
All right.
Yes.
Now that you've said that the laws and regulations are not encompassed in one sort of a bill or one act, do we really have a compensation mechanism in this country? Because most of the time the government will move to provide food, to provide some makeshift shelter. Or in this particular case of Mai Mahiu, we are having the government pay hospital bill for some of those affected and in hospital. But you'll find somebody who does not have a hospital bill, but the properties have been washed away. Do we have a compensation mechanism? And if so, then can somebody agitate for more funds in the event that they feel the government is giving them 100,000 and what has been washed away is worth more than 500,000? How is the recourse in such situations?
Thank you for that question. Currently, we have the Victim Protection Act, but the Victim Protection Act is more inclined towards matters which are already before court, where, let's say, in a criminal case, someone has been convicted and then they have to pay for the other party. But in this case, we are talking about the general public. And we are talking about the government and the general public, government vis-a-vis the general public. So the question again is, what is the right channel, or what way can the citizenry proceed so as to claim damages? The right procedure currently, because we have all these fragmented laws and none which has aligned to provide a compensation mechanism, is through a petition. So I think you mentioned something to do with a class action suit. So the people who are affected within Mai Mahiu, they have a right to proceed to court either individually or as a group, and posed a class action suit through a petition. So it is through the petition where you claim the infringement or the violation of your rights, and then you pray for orders before court. And the orders cut across damages, and it is through these damages that they will be able to be compensated for the loss of lives of their loved ones, as well as for the loss of property or for the destruction of their property. Or for example, we know that there are even areas where people cannot go back to their pieces of property. So there is that mechanism. And I said, through Article 22 of the Constitution and the Mutunga rules, you even don't have to have a lawyer in place, but it's advisable to have a lawyer because they know how to canvass the law and they know how to press where it hurts. So, but as a citizenry person to the Mutunga rules, they can even proceed with a letter. They can post this letter, submit it before court, and the court will guide them on how they will lodge that petition until the court gives them a latitude to present their grievances. The court decides on the case, and the court grants them the damages. And again, as I said, the government is not immune to proceedings. As Professor Sifuna, who's a current judge in the High Court, stated that you can even proceed and attach the government property where you have won a case against the government. That goes to show that the government and the government bodies and the government officers should be held accountable for all their actions, and should be held accountable where there is laxity within a government department or where probably they are not measuring up to the responsibility which is bestowed upon them.
All right. Thank you so much, Lawyer Kariki, for that particular perspective. We'll be taking our second break and having the tail end of this particular discussion, of course, canvassing and bringing the discussion to a close. A lot has been said on what the common mwananchi is supposed to do and where the government is failing in terms of protecting the rights of citizens. See you on the other side of this break.
Are you an aspiring media practitioner, a graduate, or you just want to advance your skills in television production? Then welcome to Kenyatta University, where education meets innovation. KUTV, the premier university television station in Kenya, is now offering short courses in TV studio, field technical operations, and video editing. Through these courses, you will acquire hands-on skills on camera operations, media production, lighting techniques, audio-visual editing, and sound and visual control, and how to operate key equipment in modern TV control room. Enroll today at KUTV and discover your full potential in cutting-edge TV broadcasting. Graduates of these courses will receive professional certificates. For more information, visit our offices at KUTV Studios or call us on 020-870-4252 or 020-870-4255 or SMS us on 0739-110-544. KUTV, a new experience.
Access to knowledge, solution to unanswered questions.
Guidelines to pursuing your rights and repossessing your property, intellectual or material.
This and more only on Law Matters.
They are powerful and influential. They make decisions in politics, education, finance, agriculture, health, sports, and all aspects of human life. But the impact of their decisions falls on you, the common citizen. KUTV Primetime News Thursday, we ask bold questions and pursue answers to the core to bring you closer to the story. We couldn't have it any other way. Join me, Auma Evans, as I raise matters of social concern to raise your voice from the background to the foreground. Every Thursday and Saturday at 9 p.m. only on KUTV.
Get ready to kickstart your day with the most exciting morning show around. Tune in to our dynamic and entertaining program where we keep you informed, engaged, and entertained from the moment you wake up.
From breaking news and current events to music, fun, and out of the ordinary stories, we've got you covered with a mix of interviews, games, and special segments. You never know what's in store.
Join us every Monday morning
and Tuesday morning
for a fun and fascinating way to start your day.
Don't miss out on the action.
Tune in now and experience the excitement for yourself.
Only on KUTV Rise Today from 7 a.m. to 10 a.m.
Start your day
with us.
Welcome back. You're watching Law Matters. On the tail end of this particular discussion tonight, we're looking into the issue of the rights of Kenyans when it comes to calamities and disaster, and what the government should do and what they're not doing at this particular moment, educating and creating awareness on what should be done in such scenarios. Now, Lawyer Kariki, how then do we balance the issue of public safety and individual safety in such situations? Because case example is in Tana River County, whereby people are told to move to higher grounds, but even as they're moving to higher grounds, the road supposed to connect them to the higher grounds has been washed away by the rains. And we had the disaster, the boat that capsized in Tana River, as people were scampering for safety given the increasing water levels. So how do we balance the public safety concerns and the individual safety concerns in such scenarios?
Okay, thank you for that question, Irene. So there is this theory that is referred to as utilitarianism, which means that the law is to be effected for the widest possible use by the members of the society. So in this circumstance, we know that the public interest always outweighs the individual interest that you have as a person. So the government is supposed to do actions which would yield to the protection of the larger masses more than the protection of that individual. But that individual should be factored into the decisions which are made for the protection of the larger masses. So in this circumstance, what probably would have happened takes me back to what I think I've incessantly repeated on this show, that the government needs to devise a National Disaster Management Act. Reason being, if there was a National Disaster Management Act that brings all the stakeholders on board, which is, for example, the meteorological department, they would have informed the government authority that there is heavy floods, there is heavy rains which are due to come, and what this means is that people should be moved before even the rain comes. Yeah, because as a country, I believe the meteorological department has mapped out areas where the heavy downfall leads to floods. For example, we know places like Budalangi, the place which you have mentioned, Tana River, time and time and again we have seen in the national television how people have been affected by the floods of River Tana. So the government, if it had this act in place, the implementation of this act, they would have prepared themselves in advance, and they would have evacuated these people way before they have scampered for their safety. For example, right now, the people who used the boats, they were scampering for their safety, because in any case, how would they have left their children stranded, or even themselves stranded, and they are seeing that these ravaging waters are coming towards their direction. So the government again needs to up its socks in this tackling of crisis by making sure that they are prepared in advance, just like the way we have fire drills in companies or places where we have employees. Among the requirements of having the fire clearance certificate is at least you should be having the routine fire drills. So people, they should be a comprehensive training and awareness to the people on how they can help themselves when you have this crisis, how they can avert this crisis through the timely access to information, because the access to information is also very critical at this time when we have crisis, because under Article 35 of the Constitution, the government should promptly inform the public when these calamities are due to happen. For example, if they had informed the public, and if the authority that is in charge of disaster would have swung into action, they would have evacuated these people. Even if the road would have been flooded, they would have proceeded to have these people at safe places as they wait for the waters to subside, and then they can be given an alternative place to call home. And again, it makes no sense to have these people evacuated to higher grounds, and then after the rain, they are allowed to get back to where they were living. The government, again, if we had an act, the National Disaster Management Act, they would have devised a way in which they would have compensated these people or taken them to an alternative piece of land and allocated them pieces of land where they would start off their lives, rather than going back to the problem, because this problem will recur time and over again. So I think it's very important that we have a very structured preparation, a very structured response to crisis, and a very structured compensation mechanism or aftermath criteria, because even the flagship tents which we currently have in places which have been affected by the ravaging floods, after the floods they will be put down and life goes back to normal, which is something which as a country we should really think into and make sure that we have a system where even where we don't have these disasters, we have a body that is in check to make sure that when these disasters occur, they swing into action without having to rely on the cabinet approval or on the county governments. And again, the question about the county governments also should be equipped and should have funds in place, not relying on the national government when a disaster has occurred. These are some of the things which really need to be restructured and looked into so that we have a very seamless and effective response mechanism in the near future.
I think it's more of having long-term solutions so that we don't keep going back to the same problems that we are facing when we have disasters in the country. But as taxpayers, should we cause an uproar, given that most of the time we're having the humanitarian organization take the first action while the government is coming in the second place? And we have even had the updates given by the counties. They're very openly saying that we want to thank Kenya Red Cross for taking action, yet in the first place, these people should just be offering additional support. Why are we paying taxes, yet humanitarian organizations are the ones, taking the first step in disasters? It seems like it is written in the Constitution that Kenya Red Cross and other organizations should be the first people to take action in such situations.
Yes, thank you, Irene. I think it's a shame for us as a country, for us to, at this age and time, to keep relying on foreign donors and humanitarian bodies from outside the country when we are faced with a calamity. And yet, as taxpayers, even at this time, this is when we are having a lot of taxes being imposed on goods and services around. And this then should measure to what the services the government is offering to us as citizenry. So the question would be, is the government prepared
Yeah.
And I think the answer is no, because the meteorological department issued a statement and a directive that there will be these rains.
Yeah.
However, what did the government do? The government said that the update which you gave us is now outlived. The money which we had assigned for floods is to be reverted to something else. So this shows the downplaying and the disregard of the directives which we have or which are given by our authorities, which is a very sad state of affairs. And moving forward, I believe if we have a fund that is set aside for disaster, let that fund remain until we have the next budgetary allocation.
Yes.
And if the fund has not been utilized, then the next budgetary allocation will just reassign it to its former allocation. Because currently, the government is grappling with where to find funds, because it reassigned funds which were meant for floods to other activities, which is, again, a very sad state of affairs. And we should really look into that. And again, how should we look into that? By making sure that we have a structured way where we have these funds allocated in an authority that is mandated by the law, and a mechanism for tracking this money. Because again, we'll hear the government say that it has released a certain amount of money, but there's no transparency and accountability. And this money is not trickling down to the common mwananchi. Yeah, the government will say it has bought food, it has bought beddings, but again, this is only to serve on the temporary as temporary measures. Yeah, in the long term, where do you expect these people to start their lives? Someone's house has been submerged by water. All their electronics, all their goods inside have all been taken away by the flash floods. How do you expect this person to start life? So the taxes that we pay should be able to support a fund other than the contingency fund, which requires a lot of approvals and requires a lot of give and take. We should have a comprehensive fund that covers disaster management, and one which can be used promptly when we have a disaster, and the impact can be felt on the victims of that specific disaster there and then, rather than having them wait for over 10 years like the internally displaced persons, which again, I think and I believe that it really takes even a mental toll on these people.
Affected people.
Yeah.
As we wind up the discussion, because of time, what are the responsibilities of business entities in terms of calamities and disaster? And the reason why I'm asking this is because the solar incident that happened, I think in 2018, has dragged on for 5 years now, and the victims have not been compensated. And somebody will beg the question, why is this issue dragging this long yet? People lost their lives, properties were destroyed, a warning was given, somebody was negligent. Why as a country do we have such situations that business entities sometimes, when they have some sort of a financial muscle, they happen to have their way at the end of it all?
Thank you for that question. I tend to believe that these again is to be addressed to the fragmented pieces of legislation, because the victims of Solai Dam, they were taken to court. The people who were involved in the construction and maintenance of the dam were taken to court through an offense that is in the Criminal Procedure Code. So this then leads to a lot of grappling in the dark with regards to which offense do we proceed to charge these people with. When you look at even that case, you'll find that the offense which these people were initially charged, they were discharged by the chief magistrate, Bidali, who was presiding in Naivasha, and they were taken in again through because of the public uproar and the question about public interest, because the citizens were aggrieved by the decision in which they had been discharged from the offenses. This goes to show that even the laws that can lead those who are culpable to action are fragmented, and you find that we just have to look at a few laws here and there just to take people in court, and 5-6 years down the line, justice gets not to be served on these people, because the dragging of the case, it comes out of the public limelight, and within no time, the people are freed and discharged, which is a very sad state of affairs. We need to see people who are involved in this disaster management and they mishandle it, or they end up misusing public resources in the wrong forums when they should be using them for crises. We need to see as a country prompt action being taken on them, and this can only be brought about when we have legislation that guides the same, so that the government and the judiciary can have easy reference to these laws and can implement and have these laws serve the purpose which they were put forth to work on.
All right, in 1 minute, because of time, do you think we should collapse the agencies that we have that are supposed to deal with disaster management in the country? I know we have so many bodies, but look at how floods and drought affect us as a country.
Yes, I believe they should be collapsed. And when you look at, for example, the restructuring, which I'm saying, of the National Drought Management Authority, I believe it should be restructured to National Disaster Management Authority, and should be the point of call for all stakeholders, that the meteorological department has to duly inform them of the crisis that the country is facing, either when there is a drought that is coming up, or when there is floods, or where there is probability of let's say, earthquake, or even the public health can easily report to the management authority and tell them that there is this disease, for example, that is called corona, that is coming up, and then the authority can then know how, or devise a way in which they can prepare the citizenry, they can respond to the crisis, and they can, again, if there are fatalities that are brought about by the crisis or the disaster, how can they then compensate the families or the business people on the destruction or loss of property? But again, I would also give credence to the government, because we currently even are seeing a lot of legislations that are surrounded around the question about climate change, because we even have like the Kenya Sovereign Green Bond framework, which is making us have infrastructure as a country that is environmentally friendly, that leads to the conservation of the environment, that approaches the land policy which you have set in the Vision 2030, as well as the climate change policy and plan as a country. Because if we work along those lines and we keep up with that energy, we'll be able to avert some of the environmental hazards that have been brought about by the actions of us as the citizenry.
All right. Thank you so much, Leo Kariuki, for making time and giving us your perspective concerning what is happening in the country currently. The discussion was quite informative, and a lot of awareness was created in terms of the legal context when it comes to disaster and calamities here in the country.
Thank you.
All right, that's it for Law Matters tonight. We have gotten quite a perspective on what should be done. Of course, Parliament being called upon to put in place legislation to protect the citizenry in case of calamities and disasters in the country, as well as the government to put more action, less talk and more of action, especially when people have lost their lives as well as properties. I've been your host, Irene Mwangi. Have a splendid night.